You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This podcast is sponsored by XDeep, world leader in technical and recreational dive equipment, and in particular the Stealth 2.0 series of sidemount diving systems. Thanks again to the XDeep team for their support of Speaking Sidemount, which makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, one of the things I love is when experienced backmount divers see the light and convert to sidemount. Nah, only kidding. Well, maybe a little bit. But it's really good to see great divers, explorers, and in today's case, photographers, seeing the benefits of sidemount and applying these benefits in specific dives that suit the configuration. Sometimes they're complete converts and never go back to backmount, but in most cases, they stay true to their backmount roots and use sidemount when the environment or dive plan makes it a better option. So when Jason Mitchell suggested that I reach out to Becky, Kagan, Schott, pointing me to a blog post she wrote on a conversion to the DiveSoft Liberty sidemount rebreather and the use of this unit to complete a very challenging cave dive, I had to learn more. Big thanks to Jason for the suggestion. Like I'm sure many of you, I've known of Becky and her work for many years. The dive industry is really small, and while we've never met, Becky and I share many dive friends and colleagues. Now, Becky and her husband David Schott run Liquid Productions, an absolute world-class video and photographic production company. They specialize in high-definition broadcast quality video and still photography. But beyond that, their thing is really capturing video and images in highly challenging and extreme environments ranging from deep caves and wrecks to the ends of the earth, including Antarctica. Their work has been featured on major channels such as National Geographic, Discovery, and the BBC, and they've won no less than 5 Emmy Awards, including for their feature on Eagle's Nest Cave System. Becky is also a tech instructor and focuses on teaching closed-circuit rebreather diving. Now, in today's episode, we learn more about how Becky got into diving and photography, about Liquid Productions and their award-winning features. We discuss diving the wrecks of the Great Lakes in North America and what it takes to be a great photographer or videographer, including some tips from Becky on how to improve your images. We then learn about Becky's use of open-circuit sidemount and her recent transition to sidemount closed-circuit rebreathers. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Becky, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Now, I've known of you for many, many years, and I know a lot of our audience will know of you through your great photography work, but I guess a lot of us don't really know much about your background, so I'd love to hear more about your background in diving.
Oh, wow. So I've been diving since I was 12 years old, and I like to tell people the obsession started, or the passion started, very early in life. And I quickly found myself diving in Florida Springs because that's where I lived and grew up. So I wanted to go a little deeper and further into those springs. So at 14 years old, I did what any normal 14-year-old would do, and I took a cavern diving class.
That's amazing. I guess if you grow up in an area like that, it's going to happen, right?
I was young and I couldn't afford to go out on boats all the time. So the springs were right in my backyard. They were inexpensive and easy to get to. And I would get bored after staying in the open water areas for a while, but I'd see those scary Grim Reaper signs saying, "Do not enter the caves." So I ended up taking a cavern class, and I never dreamed that I would fall in love with technical diving because when I started, I was just into reefs and fish, and it's amazing how things can evolve.
Yeah, what was the attraction to going further into the caves, for instance, for you?
I liked the planning. I liked the technical aspects of it, and just that it was so different than just jumping off a cattle boat with 20 other people and floating down a reef. Really, to this day, I still enjoy, technical dive planning.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm exactly the same way. And you're the first person I've interviewed, funnily enough, who said the same thing as me, which is because I got into cave diving not because I was particularly interested in caves. I thought, wow, look at the skill set these guys have. And imagine the planning that you have to do to be able to safely dive there.
I did my cavern diving course, and then afterwards, a couple years later, I was doing a master diver class, and the instructor was also an intro to cave instructor, and he said, well, why aren't you into cave diving yet? I'm like, I don't know. And he put me in a set of doubles and took me about 300 feet back into Ginnie Springs in Florida, and I instantly fell in love with cave diving. And I didn't think I could handle the gear, but I could. And, I found that it was a whole different world that opened up to me. So.
Awesome. And am I right that you started your career in photography as a photojournalist?
I did, yeah. So I started, actually when I was in college, I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I was minoring in journalism. And about my second year through, I had a really amazing internship down in the Florida Keys studying an algae. I figured out during that internship that I did not want to be a biologist. And so I went back into school the following semester. I switched my major to journalism and started interning at an NBC station across the street from my university. And so, my first start was in television news and covering all sorts of things from crime to hurricanes, baby black bears, alligators in backyard pools, red tide, fires, all kinds of things, politics. It was a really interesting way to start.
And I guess a good grounding when you think about the work you do now, extreme environments at the ends of the earth, what a great grounding to sort of capture things from very diverse environments.
Yeah, you know what? At the time, I didn't realize how beneficial being a photojournalist would be to what I wanted to do down the road in the future, because what I was doing was very run and gun, working in news. And it's very similar to what I do in extreme environments now. I have to set myself up for success. I have to get in the water make sure I've got batteries in the camera, fresh memory cards, strobes are working. And if something doesn't work and I'm 200 feet deep, 60 meters deep, I've got to find a way to make it work. And I think that journalism background really set me up for success in what I'm doing today, because failure just wasn't an option.
Yeah, exactly. And you said then that you were always thinking of becoming an underwater photographer. Was that always the plan?
Yeah, I started shooting when I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, still photography. I did start shooting film. And then when I was in college, I got my first digital underwater camera. And so it was always a passion of mine. But still, even in college, I didn't know that I could make it a profession, because I knew it was very competitive. There's very few people out there doing it. Obviously, I was a huge admirer of Wes Skiles' work, but I didn't know if I could be doing that. And then, you know what? I started and said, I'm just going to try. Why not? And started borrowing underwater camera housings to start shooting reels and practicing and applying all of the skills that I learned on land to my underwater shooting. So.
Right. And you do everything now under Liquid Productions. So tell us a bit about Liquid Productions.
Sure. Liquid Productions, both my husband and I own the company. And we do everything from shooting documentaries. We do some reality shows. I write for about 5 or 6 different scuba diving magazines. And actually, I've got an article coming out in the Smithsonian magazine pretty soon about a sub that's going to go down to the Titanic this summer. So I'm even stretching that out and working for some bigger magazines now. I'm also a technical diving instructor. So when things are slow in the documentary world, I still enjoy teaching technical diving, but mainly rebreathers at this time.
Yeah. And that was a question I had a little later for you, but sort of how do you balance between your photography work and your instruction work?
I typically only do about 4 rebreather classes a year, and maybe 1 or 2 more advanced rebreather classes like Trimix, mixed gas CCR, and basically run one every 3 months. And just put that on the calendar and say, that's what I'm going to do. And honestly, I love teaching for so many reasons. It keeps my skills sharp. I still love introducing people to the technology and the equipment. And I don't know if this sounds bad, but I'm definitely someone who's out there diving in a variety of environments, from caves to deep wrecks, cold water, warm water, all over the world. And so I have a lot of varied experience to share with my students, when they come to take a class with me. So I don't want to just keep that to myself. I definitely want to share that experience that I have with other people.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And I'm kind of similar in some ways in that, not so much in the different environments, but more from the point of view that I kind of teach Sidemount about once a month, maybe once every 2 months sometimes. And I really love teaching, but at the same time, I'm not pounding out courses. I'm teaching to people who really want to learn, who really want to come and learn from me. So I find it actually really cool to be able to do it in that fashion and not rely on it to put food on the table, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not just teaching to make a paycheck. I do it because I enjoy it, and I do it because the same thing you just mentioned, I want people that really want to learn. I don't want somebody that just wants a certification, because I kind of feel like we're a little family after I've taken them under my wing and I teach them, this specialized tool. Afterwards, I want to keep diving with them. And I feel like I'm creating dive buddies and people that I can trust down the road. And so it's important to me to not just, be pumping out students.
Yeah, I hear that. And do you find a lot of your students have a photography angle as well, or do they come from lots of different backgrounds?
Yeah, I feel like they come from a lot of different backgrounds. They might take a class from me because they know of me or they know of my photography, or again, varied environments, but maybe only a couple a year are photographers. Not that many, actually.
Okay. That surprises me. I would think if I was a photographer and wanted to learn CCR, I'm coming to you, right?
Well, I think the ones that do, but it's not that many. I think between all the expensive camera equipment and expensive rebreather, things start adding up.
Don't get me started. So we're going to talk about that some more later on, but my bank balance is looking sick, I can promise you. Okay, so I think it's under Liquid. You've won 5 Emmy Awards. Tell us a little bit about the projects that were associated with that.
Yeah, I both my husband and I have both won 5 Emmys, and I'm really, really proud of them. I think the first one will always be the most special because we went out not seeking to obviously win an Emmy or any kind of award, but the story was on Eagle's Nest Cave, a very popular cave in Florida. There's been a lot of deaths in the cave as well. And usually when that cave is talked about in the news or in the media, it's always talked about in a negative way because there was some kind of death there. So our story was not a death story. It was just, why do people come from all over the world to go to the swamp in Florida? And what's here? Like, it had an exploration angle. And yeah, we submitted it for the Emmys and it won. And I was proud of that because I've always tried to show our sport in a positive way, and especially show cave diving in a positive way, because usually the only time cave diving's in the news is when it's
gone bad,
a negative
right?
story.
Yeah. And our good friend Ed's just gone and done an amazing rescue again, huh? So,
Yeah. He takes the cake for positive cave diving stories. And one of the other 4 that we won was actually a story we did with Ed. We did a reenactment of one of the rescues that he performed. And that was part of a 4-part series on CBS about cave diving. One was on exploration, one was on rescue, one was on a tragedy, and the other was on just training and why you should seek out training. So those were the other 4 Emmys. And again, I was really proud of those, both my husband and I, because we never expected that. We're in this unique position to share our knowledge and experience. And as much as I love taking beautiful photos, if somebody can learn from that photo or image, or it inspires somebody to go and take a class, that's the end goal. I mean, that means more than anything else.
And I think the truth is, if you're award chasing, you probably fail, right? The motivations are all in the wrong place, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, what does it mean then? I mean, the best compliment I could ever get is somebody says, I never thought I would become a technical diver because I saw one of your photos of a wreck in the Great Lakes and I want to go see that shipwreck. And you're in awe that, somebody basically took a turn or changed their life because of an image that they saw. So
yeah, we're going to get into your images because I just think they're beyond amazing. But you're renowned for these projects at the extreme ends of the world and lots of different environments. And I think I know the answer to this question. I'm going to ask it anyhow. What's your favorite?
What's my favorite place?
Yes.
Oh boy, that's actually, I can easily answer that. The Great Lakes in North America are my favorite place to dive because they are so unique and the shipwrecks are so well preserved and they're haunting and there's so many of them. I absolutely love diving these shipwrecks. And believe me, I never would have thought that after traveling all over the world, my favorite place would literally be in my backyard, but it is. Yeah.
And so tell us about your experiences there. I know you've done literally, hundreds of dives, thousands of dives there, but tell us a little bit about some of your favorite experiences.
Oh, it's interesting because diving, there's 5 Great Lakes and each one is very different from the other. And so it's fascinating to see these differences. So Lake Superior, for instance, there's no mussels in the lake. So you dive down on these shipwrecks, something like the yacht Ganilda, which is in the northern part of the lake. And it's over 107 years old, but it looks like it sank yesterday. You can still read the name on the back of the ship. You still have the wheel and telegraph and the white paint on the hull. And it's haunting and it's beautiful to see this. It's like visiting an underwater museum. And I've just never seen anything like it. Because growing up in Florida, wrecks to me were bridge culvert pilings and just maybe artificial reefs, broken up pieces of metal. It just wasn't that exciting. These wrecks in the Great Lakes, it's what any kid would picture a shipwreck to be like. If you closed your eyes and said, "This is a shipwreck," Yeah, to me, that's what they look like. So, some of my favorite dives are one called Daniel J. Morrell. It's a giant freighter that is in Lake Huron. And, when I read the story about this wreck, it sends shivers down your spine. And then, so there was only one survivor on this shipwreck out of a crew of 29. Only one man survived. And you read his harrowing tale about his survival. And you see this wreck sitting so peaceful on the bottom, but what Mother Nature did to send it there, ripping it apart, it's just very powerful. So I'm trying to take powerful images that go along with these powerful stories. And there are so many stories, stories of survival, stories of mystery, ships that just disappeared and nobody knew what happened to them for over a century or more, stories of heroism. It's just, they go on, and they all have a really interesting, unique story and visuals.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one of the great attractions of wreck diving is this whole thing that there's a story behind a wreck. Yeah, I talk to a lot of cave divers, and that's the difference, I think, between shipwrecks and caves, isn't it? A shipwreck has a history, people served on it, people lived on it, people maybe died on it. And when you investigate the story behind it before you dive the wreck, I think you get a lot more out of the wreck dives as well, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I do a lot of research. I try to find old photos if possible, read stories about it, because the story, that is what grasps you. Just looking at the shipwreck can be interesting. You can say that's a really pretty picture, but if you hear the story behind it, it just makes it that much more exciting. And I hate to say it because, I grew up as a cave diver. I'm still a cave diver. I don't put myself really into any one category, but over the last decade, I've really turned into a wreck diver. And like you said, I love the stories and the history and the human elements, the connections that you can make with the shipwrecks.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about sharing, but I think I saw you did a project with some high school students to help them do some research projects on. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the first projects I did in the Great Lakes, and it was with NOAA and Sony and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And we took a group of high school students out that lived in Michigan and showed them how to explore in their own backyard. So they got to work with people that helped find the Titanic shipwreck, and they learned how to use ROVs, and they did the research, worked with the other explorers, and they found 2 brand new shipwrecks on the bottom of Lake Huron that were both over 100 years old that nobody's ever dived before. So it was really fun because, you saw them transform during this process. And then it's, obviously fun for us too, because we got to go down, to be the first on these wrecks, and we shared it in real time with the students. So we had our cameras connected through a live feed to the surface. So they were seeing exactly what we were seeing in real time. So it was a really exciting project. It was called Project Ship Hunts, and it can still be found online.
Brilliant. And were they involved in doing the research that helped find the wrecks?
A little bit of the research. There was an explorer, Stan Stock, working with us who was basically looking for these wrecks for maybe 15 to 20 years. He had sort of an area, but what they really helped with was identifying the wrecks as well. So, the first target that we hit, we actually thought it was going to be a schooner, and it ended up being a big upside down freighter. So then we were going, well, let's identify this. So they helped by looking at the length of the ship and, looking for other details, trying to help identify it.
Oh, it sounds amazing, and being able to share it with kids. Jill Hyneth talked a lot about what she does in Canada with that as well, and I think it's really neat to be able to work with the next generation and help them become enamored with what we love in shipwrecks and diving. Talking of shooting, again, we've talked about your favorite. Is there a place that you're really looking forward to going that you haven't been yet?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So at the top of my list was Antarctica, and I got to go there last year. And Antarctica is still at the top of my list because it's just so mind-blowing and incredible. But as far as places I haven't been yet, I'd probably say Bikini. I'd really like to get to Bikini Atoll and some shipwrecks there.
Yeah.
Most of my top... Oh, yeah. I don't think he's going there now.
We have to talk to him. So I've done Pete's trips to truck, and he runs a really good trip. I don't know if you've been on his ones.
Yeah, they are absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Talking about photography, what do you think it takes to be a top photographer?
To be a top photographer, it takes a lot of passion, persistence, drive, motivation. You can't be scared of failure because it's going to happen. And I would say the biggest thing is persistence. And obviously you have to have some skill as well. Yeah. But it's not easy. It's not an easy profession, not only to capture the images, but then also to either sell them or write for magazines or get hired on to work for Nat Geo or other networks. So being persistent is a huge, huge attribute. And then lastly, I say obviously diving skills, because without those, it's hard to capture good imagery and do it safely. So that's where I think when a lot of people, try to get into it, they have to realize it takes time. You don't just pick up a camera and some dive gear and jump in and instantly become a world-class photographer. At least that didn't happen for me. Maybe it happens for other people, but
if it does, we don't know them, right?
Yeah, but it's taken me a lot of years and a lot of skills. And I would say I'm a diver first before anything else, because that's always what I'm concentrating on, either learning new skills, practicing skills, diving in so many different types of environments. I always want to stay sharp on different configurations, which can be really difficult. But, if I'm called by a major network to say, oh, we want to go film this documentary in Alaska in 1 degree water, I've got to be ready to go. And, the skills have to be ready to go in order to come back with good imagery. So it's important to stay sharp on those diving skills. So they go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a really, really important point, because as divers, I assume the photography really comes second when you're going into the environment, right? Some of them are more extreme than others. Being a really stable platform must be one of the most important things, because I know stillness in video is really important. Stillness and still photography must also be important. And you can't be still in the water if you're not stable. You can't be stable if you don't have your gear, squared away. And you can't be safe if you don't have your skills squared away.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. So it's amazing. I don't really even think about it sometimes at this point in my diving career, but I'll go down on maybe a 60-meter deep shipwreck, cold water, and we only have maybe 25 to 30 minutes to accomplish the shot that I want. And a lot of times on a lot of my images, I'm working with, a small team of people. And so, I'm sitting there trying to get my angle right, looking where the sun, where's my model position, where am I positioned, what's my PO2, where are my fins, where's my model's light pointing. Just there's so many things going on that are all just happening simultaneously in order to get the shot. And sometimes directing, trying to get move lights around.
I can imagine the signals going on, right?
There's a lot of screaming.
Thank God you can speak with a rebreather, right?
Oh, thank goodness, yes. But yeah, there's just so many things going on that, the life support obviously comes first if it's a rebreather, but to the point where it's just automatic and I'm thinking, I'm looking and adding the gases that I need, just automatically changing the settings on my camera. Everything's just flowing.
Right.
And obviously we all have off days, but usually when things are on, they're on, and we don't have a lot of time to get the images that we want, especially in cold, deep water. So it's really nice when you're in warmer.
I bet. And I've got some plans to dive in cold water. So tell us a bit about your thoughts on diving cold water. And this is a question for Steve more than just about anything else, is what do you do to prepare yourself equipment-wise, mentally, skills-wise to dive in cold environments?
You just got to get in there. I grew up in Florida, and I thought anything less than, the springs were Arctic temperatures. And, dressing for success is really important. Getting the right undergarments, layering those undergarments properly, just like you would. I don't know how cold it gets where you live, but where I live can get to be pretty cold. So I wouldn't go outside, without layering properly if there's a snowstorm. So I kind of do the same thing when I'm diving, make sure I have a nice base layer. Then I wear a Light Monkey heated shirt on top of that, like Fourth Element Halo 3D. And then obviously get in the water, check out your weighting, work with the dry gloves, because there's so many different dry glove systems. And I see so many of them leaking on my Great Lakes trips. Half the people that come, they're unfortunately they're mostly a lot of glove problems. So I don't like to have cold hands, especially gripping a camera. My hands are already cold enough. Testing out your gear in cold water is key, and just that layering process to stay warm. So then I don't think about it after that. I never would have thought I could stay for hours in cold water, but I also think the photography distracts me quite a bit, and I'm not thinking about the cold. I'm thinking about the camera, the settings, the lighting, just how I want to get the shot. So I think that also, if you can keep your mind off of being cold, that's all.
It makes sense. So I know you're running some workshops, I think this year in Track Lagoon and also in Croatia, helping budding photographers learn the skills they need. And you talk about models and lighting and storytelling, enhancing imagery with post-processing and so on. So tell us a bit about what people could expect from your course. And also, could you weave into that a little bit about, if you're a budding photographer, what sort of things should you be trying to learn?
Sure. So I get a lot of people that really want to learn photography, and they're at all different levels. They may own a GoPro, a point and shoot type camera all the way up through a DSLR. Sometimes people come to the workshops with brand new DSLR cameras, or there's more experienced people that come that maybe have key things that they really want to learn. So workshops can be challenging because there's all different skill levels, but I try to share my knowledge and experience in different ways and answer questions. So I'm doing this workshop in Truck Lagoon this year, actually with Pete Mesley. We co-run the trip together, so that's super exciting because obviously he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to photography as well. Sure. And then also in Croatia. So they're both kind of geared towards rec photography, especially. We'll talk about working with models and lighting, talk about storytelling and how to really capture that. And so a lot of that goes back to what we were just talking about, doing some research, learning a little bit about the wreck, and maybe picking key things on that shipwreck that you want to focus on. So I don't just dive and take pictures. I get in the water to capture an image. So we try to teach that, to hone that in a bit. For new photographers just starting out, I think the biggest things to learn is obviously keeping those dive skills sharp first, being a good diver, having good buoyancy, having your gear squared away, because that's key. And then adding the camera on top of that. And what I like to tell new photographers is you don't have to be diving all the time. You can be sitting on your couch and sitting there playing with your camera, playing with your settings. And it's really amazing to learn your camera on land before you ever put it in that underwater housing, because you don't want to be on your dive, this amazing dive in Truck Lagoon that you're only going to get to do once, and you're fiddling trying to find a camera setting. So the more you can learn about your camera and read the manual.
Thank you for saying that. I've worked in software for years and years, and the company that I ran, the software was used to write technical manuals. And we always used to laugh that nobody ever reads the manual. It's so important. So
it is. And even so, I shoot with a Nikon D850 right now. And that camera, it has so many functions I'll never even use. But at least I put the PDF on my iPad or on my phone. So even if I'm somewhere and I go, you know what? Today, I'd love to do some time-lapse photography. I can't remember how to do that on my camera. I can open up the manual real quick, and I know what my camera does at least, or what it can do. So reading the manual is really important. I definitely recommend that to anybody starting out brand new with their brand new camera.
This is Speaking Sidemount, right? And we've been talking a lot about photography, and that's kind of my fault because I was really interested. So I hope everyone's enjoyed that and hearing about Becky's background and also about her photography. But I really want to talk about Sidemount with you now. So you're known mainly as a CCR diver, but I know you've dived some open circuit Sidemount. So how did that come about? Where did you train? Who did you train with? And what did you do with Sidemount in the very beginning?
Sure. I would say I dabbled in Sidemount. So I've been diving it for maybe 7 or so years, and obviously started picking up Sidemount because of certain projects that were coming up, whether it was in Mexico or the Bahamas, and I specifically needed to be on Sidemount. So actually my first experience on Sidemount was with Natalie Gibb in Mexico. Cool. And she put me in a Razor Sidemount harness and took me in the water, and I instantly, I fell in love with it. But I also recognize that there's a lot more going on with Sidemount than there is with any other configuration. And I definitely feel like it's the most challenging configuration out of everything I dive. But that's also because I wouldn't do it consistently on open circuit. I would practice and do a handful of dives a year and make sure I was set up and okay for projects that came about. But I would never consider myself, like a Steve Bogarts or Ed Sorensen. But again, like safe, comfortable, competent, where I'm not going to damage the cave. I might not have been the prettiest open circuit Sidemount diver, but I recognized it as a tool that I needed to learn and used on several projects, especially with Brian K. Cook and Jill Heiner from the Bahamas. We've done maybe 3 or 4 different Sidemount shoots there.
Yeah, I saw those. And when I was talking to Brian, I was sort of asking him about those photographs. They just were amazing. And I love that you trained with Nat because, she's a really, really good Sidemount diver, great instructor. And I think one of the things I'm always saying to people is if you want to get into Sidemount, it is a little different to just throwing a twin set on your back. There's much more to it. And so if you go and find a really good instructor, I can throw 100 names out. Many of them have been my guests on the show. A good instructor will give you a good grounding, and then you can work on that.
She gave me like an intro to Sidemounts. So I did not get the whole class with her because it was also different. That was in Mexico with aluminum 80s and the Razor, but that's not typically how I was diving. So I went back to Florida, and then I was in my dry suit with steel 85s, completely different, a little bit more for Florida cave diving. So I did course with Corey Mearns there. And I'd say I've learned and picked up things from everybody I've dived with over the years. I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of diving with Ed Sorensen and Brian and Jill. And even though I never took official classes with them, I've definitely picked up a lot from them just through, just
observation, right?
Observation. I don't know about mentorship, but just observation and just diving, asking questions. To me, it's not about a certification. It's about, your skill and improving. And I just always find it fascinating because everybody has a different style and a different...
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing about side mount, especially from the likes of GUE. Back mount now has one way of doing it, and it's pretty much accepted. The Hogarthian method is the way to DIR. That's the way to do back mount. But side mount doesn't have that. And so you've kind of grew out of the CDG in the UK. And if you see the CDG guys, they're very, very different to us because they're sump divers. They want to carry little, small 7-litre cylinders, 40 cubic feet, and they want to be able to carry them over dry passages, and they want to be able to climb. So they're effectively wearing climbing harnesses that they can put side mount cylinders on. And it's quite different. And then, of course, what I call Bogarthian, which has come out of Mexico with Steve. And I don't think he liked it when I mentioned that, but he was the birthplace of certainly the way that I dive side mount and many others do, with a short hose and a long hose. And yes, they're with aluminium or aluminum 80s and in fresh water. And then you've got Florida cave divers, colder water, dry suits, steel cylinders, but still fresh water. And then you've got doing that again in salt water. And I never forget my experience coming back from Mexico, having done side mount and intro to cave. And I was living in California, and I jumped into the 10-degree water in Monterey Bay and threw some steel cylinders on with my dry suit. And it was horrendous. And just the feeling of, oh my God, this is so wrong. And so immediately going, okay, well, how do I go about fixing this? And unfortunately, in those days and in that location, there was not really anyone to help me. So I had to figure it out for myself. Yeah, it took about 20 dives to really get it right. But after that, then it started becoming dialed in. And now I'm absolutely, my specialization is dry suit, saltwater, steel cylinders. And I do that more than anything else.
It is fascinating, the different specializations and the configurations, the way they change for all these different environments.
Yeah. And then I took that to Truck Lagoon. I talk about that on the Truck Lagoon episode, where I'm diving 4 aluminum 80s or aluminium 80s, or 11 litres as we say. And so being able to dive those in truck and being stable in a 3mm wetsuit when you're doing a 65, 70 metre dive there is super interesting. And I was able to apply some techniques that I learned from some other people like Thomas Mishura with using a trimming bladder. And as a result of that, I was kind of the most trimmed out, I'll say this, it sounds a bit arrogant, but I was super trimmed out, really, really in good shape. And most of the CCR divers and back mount divers really struggled there because their configurations didn't allow them to trim well. They just couldn't carry enough weight, right? It was really nice to be able to do that and be able to apply it to a different environment. So you've done a little bit of side mount open circuit, and now I saw through the GUE blog that you've made the transition to, or you're doing a crossover to the Dive Soft Liberty. I'm really interested in a whole lot of aspects around that. Number one, why did you want to do that? So let's start with that question. Why go to side mount CCR?
So so in the last 7 years, I've done a fair amount of side mount diving. Again, Mexico, Bahamas, Florida, British Columbia. I've both cold and warm water, steel, aluminum, all these different configurations. Mm-hmm. And my last shoot in the Bahamas with Brian K. Cook and Jill for a Nat Geo project, we had to wear several. I think I had 5 tanks on in total and pushing a giant 70-pound camera through the water. And it was a lot. And when you're also filming or working underwater, it's an open circuit side mount. You're moving the tanks, you're changing regs, you're looking at gauges. There's so much movement going on, which is not really conducive for shooting, especially video. So I would just say it was usually my least favorite configuration because of all the movement going on and the moving of tanks and things like that. But on that shoot, and after using 5 tanks, I saw the need for a side mount rebreather. And actually at the time, both Ed and Brian were with us on that shoot. And so they were both on their sidekicks and said, you know what, it's time to start looking. I now have a need for a side mount rebreather. And I've been diving with like Evan Kovacs for maybe 12 years, and he's been on the side mount Prism. So it wasn't unfamiliar territory to me, but I'm more familiar with CCR at this point. I prefer to be on CCR. So even going back to open circuit, I just didn't even want to be on open circuit anymore. So I started about a year-long process looking at different rebreathers. I'm fortunate enough to go to a lot of different dive shows, spend a lot of time with different manufacturers, started talking to my different friends, doing some demos on units. And I finally settled on the Dive Soft Liberty because of a lot of different reasons, but obviously it's what I feel best fits me and the types of diving that I do. And also talked to obviously close friends that are diving it as well, that like the unit, but love that it's self-contained, that it's about the size of an aluminum 80, and it's got both of its DIL and O2 tanks on board. Mine has a short scrubber canister on it, so even though I'm not a very tall person, that does shorten up the length on it quite a bit, and it's neutral in the water, so which is so nice. So now at this point, so I did my class on it in January, and I already have about 50 hours on it. Varied environments, from Florida caves to this cave in Belize, a couple caves in Belize, to some cold water diving and shipwrecks already here in Pennsylvania. I've been up to the quarry a couple times, using it with dry gloves and, steel tanks, aluminum tanks, everything. And it's already been easier than it ever was on open circuit because nothing changes. It's everything stays put. Tanks don't need to be moved. The gases don't change. You're not changing regulators. It's the most comfortable I've ever felt on side mounts.
That's awesome to hear. So obviously you just talked about the differences between open circuit and closed circuit side mount. How do you find the difference between your back mount CCR, I think you dive a Meg, right, and the Liberty?
It's hard to compare any back mount unit to a side mount unit because they're just different tools. They do breathe differently. To me, a side mount unit doesn't replace my back mount unit. For the majority of diving that I'm still going to do, it's going to be back mount CCR. But for a lot of the cave diving that I do, some of the travel, especially for the cave diving, I think the side mount CCR is definitely an incredible tool to go with. The difference is definitely in the work of breathing. The Liberty does breathe extremely well with that counter lung kind of tucked up right underneath your armpit. And it breathes really well in a horizontal position. When your head's down and head's up, just like any other side mount rebreather, those are the difficult positions to be in. So I just recently was diving in a cave called Giant Cave in Belize, and it's a more advanced cave dive because of the conditions and the entrance. I've been there a couple times in the past, so I knew what the entrance would be like, but this was my first time doing it on a side mount CCR. And the difference was you have to go about heads down in a vertical fissure crack for about 40 feet. And that was very different than being on a back mount CCR because there was no breathing. And even on the Liberty, it has an ADV which activates, which is great, but all the gas wants to travel, to the highest point of the rebreather. So for, maybe half a minute or so, you're just not really breathing. But what I do like about that particular unit is that you do have the NAVs right on the mouthpiece, so you can add diluent and O2 really easily. It does have the ADV, but for any side mount rebreather, the difficult positions are going to be the heads up and heads down positions. So the same thing coming out of that cave, going in a straight heads up position for that same 40 feet, you feel all the gas travel up to your cheeks, and naturally you want to let it out. But you don't want to do that on the side mount CCR because then you've just drained your whole counter lung. So it's a different feeling to get used to. And normally you might not be in those positions, but I have no choice in that particular cave. So
yeah. And I think there could be a lot of different circumstances where that might happen. I can imagine the same thing, maybe not the same distance in a shipwreck though, where you want to go down a deck or down through a passage that's sloping, or a ship could be turned on its side and you're following a passage downwards. And so you're going to find the same thing. So it's really interesting to do that. A little bit like you, I was super interested about your decision with the Liberty because I interviewed Steve Bogarts way back and also Jill Heineth, and they both spoke of the Liberty. I've interviewed Gary Dallas on the SF2, Thorsten Belder or Toddy on the new T-Rev that's coming out this summer in the Northern Hemisphere, which sounds super exciting. And then I got a chance to have a long conversation with Brian Kaycook about the KISS Sidekick. And then Ed and I did a big session on the Sidewinder. And I've been doing exactly the same thing without being able to go and actually dive them. I've been talking to some of the world's best divers in each one and saying, hey, what do you love about your units? And so I find it really interesting just from a side mount diver's perspective, because I'm coming at it from a different angle to what you were. I don't have back mount experience in CCR, and I don't have a lot on open circuit either. So to me, side mount is an absolute platform that I apply to different environments. And I have developed sufficient expertise and skill now that I don't really notice 4 cylinders. 5 is a problem, but can be super stable in virtually any environment. So for me, a side mount rebreather is really important if I'm going to go there. But looking at the worker breathing weaknesses and so on, it's kind of led me to think, gee, I really want to have a look at the Sidewinder, and planning on doing some training with Ed to have a look at that unit. So did you consider some of the other units as well?
Oh, of course. I looked at all of them. Like I said, I talked to Ed, Brian, Jill. I talked to all of my friends and the people I consider experts, and got to try a couple as well. Again, I think it's what fits you best, and for the environments that you're in and what you're doing. I definitely feel that back mount, and this is probably a big debate, or there's sort of some gray area here right now, but I definitely think back mount experience helps. Back mount rebreather experience is beneficial before going to a side mount rebreather, just to have rebreather experience first. I think it's an easier transition.
Jill said the same thing, and she said from the perspective of, so you understand how a rebreather should breathe, or how a back mount rebreather does breathe. And then she said, once you've got that foundation or that base, then when you look at the side mount one, you sort of understand, okay, I know why it's not breathing as well in these orientations.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so we were talking about orientations and, going in different heads down positions. I think then now I'm just compensating for it. So it's not a big deal now, but it's very challenging. So going from open circuit side mount, where you can breathe all the time, there's all the gas you want right there. Well, it's different because now when you look at a tunnel that's you're going to go slightly heads down, you in your minds already prepare for, all right, worker breathing is going to get more difficult here for about a minute or 30 seconds, and then it's going to be better. And when I say more difficult, it's not being able to not breathe, but not getting a full breath either. And again, that's where that back mount experience comes in. Just knowing more about a rebreather before transitioning over to a side mount rebreather, I think is really helpful. And then you just compensate for those times that, might be more difficult. Or you just really try to stay horizontal as much as you can.
Well, that's the side mount thing, right? Be in trim.
Absolutely. And, sometimes, I fully admit I'm a photographer. I can't always be in a horizontal position. Like, you might look at me and go, wow, she's awful. But I can't always get the shot I need. Sometimes I'm, turned 90 degrees to the side, looking up at the surface.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because there's this whole trim thing going on. If you are motionless in the water taking a photograph, it doesn't matter what orientation you're in. Who cares? That's not relevant. When you need to be in trim is when you're moving, because that's the time when streamlining and efficiency is really important. So this whole thing, oh my God, there's a photograph of Becky or Steve or whomever, and they're not in trim. The whole trim thing is super important. It's about streamlining, and that's the main principle and the reason that you want to be in trim. There are other reasons, but that's the predominant one. And if you're moving forward in the water, then be in trim. But that might not be horizontal. It's actually in line with your direction of travel. I've got a picture of me actually seeming like I'm out of trim over a tank on one of the wrecks in truck, but I'm going over the top of the wreck, so over the top of the tank. So I'm at about a 45-degree angle, and it's a super cool shot, but I'm not in horizontal trim. I'm in trim with the direction of travel.
Oh, that's a very good point.
Yeah, and you're off the hook. If you're taking a photograph, you can be however you want to be, as long as it's a good shot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's been a fun experience. I like learning, and I like growing as a diver, and learning new tools and gaining new skills. And like I said, just learning this side mount rebreather has been a whole new experience. And I was a little nervous actually before I took the training, because I don't know if I'm going to like it. I don't know if, like how it's going to breathe, all these things. And I would say, because I pre-breathed it on the stairs, before we got into the water. And obviously I was not in horizontal position. So that was it was difficult breathing. I clipped it on. I still wasn't sure. And the second I got horizontal and descended down into the basin at Ginny Springs, I went, wow, this feels really great. And really comfortable, adjusting the hoses a little bit and trying to find that kind of that right position for where to clip it off. And sure, there's still some tweaking to do, but it's been a fun process, and it's a fun unit. Like I kind of feel like I'm learning how to dive again, and it's streamlined, and I can spend a lot more time than I could have with open circuit.
Very cool. And I think you raise a good point. Most of the world's really experienced and really great divers are always learning. I talked to Tom Steiner last week in last week's episode, and every year that guy takes a course from somebody. And his thing is he's just such a superb diver, and yet at the same time, he's open enough to say, hey, I'll learn something. It's good for me to see how other instructors teach. It's good for me to learn something new every year. So.
I completely agree. I think, that's when you get stale and stagnant, when you stop learning. And there's so much to learn from so many different divers out there. I don't think any of us know it all. So it's fun to keep evolving.
So tell us a bit more about your thoughts and experiences with side mount rebreathers.
Side mount rebreathers it's a whole new territory right now. And even the training experience there, it's different between different manufacturers and different units. There's no one set way in doing it. So I think it's really something that's evolving and changing, and there's no one set of standards. You go on these forums and you're even looking at like bailout gas planning, or it's different between the different rebreathers. Mine has onboard diluent and O2, whereas, some of the other units you have to plumb in from, one of your offboard bailout tanks. So then there's considerations there. So there's so many different just setups and ways of doing it right now. So it's an interesting thing to talk about because it's just evolving. And I think our teaching is going to evolve as our experience evolves with side mount rebreathers.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head. The technology is changing so much right now too. And I know with the T-Rev, they're doing a huge amount of work around worker breathing, for instance, and obviously DiveSoft with the Liberty have as well. And so that's an important factor, recognizing the weaknesses in the technology and saying, how can we improve that? As Jill said, you're playing with physics a little bit. If it's mounted in that position and that's where the counterlung is, you're kind of somewhat restricted, but there will be other ways to get around that. So I think we're seeing a great period of technological change. The electronics here are obviously improving as well, which is a big deal, especially for the ECCRs. And then I think the other thing that's happening is some great side mount divers are now either working with CCR in a big way. And by that, I mean looking at the Razor team in particular and what they're doing around the Liberty, looking at the HP and Uta and those guys and how squared away they are. And that's as much about the unit itself as it is about your harness, about where you're mounting bailout and how you're rigging that. And the objective in side mount is always to make sure that your cylinders and your equipment feel like they're part of your body. So if your body moves, your cylinders should not stay behind, right? They shouldn't rattle at all. They should be in trim with your body all of the time. And so the ability to be able to rig it in that way is super important. And I think we're going to see some people, again, talking to Gary Dallas, he spoke to me about how he set up the SF2 as well. And what was important to him was how he routed the hoses. So he had all the hose routing set up. So it was very similar to what he'd done before. So one caveat to that will be, I think side mount's going to remain the way it is at the moment a little bit, where you're going to have a whole lot of different people doing it in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's a whole nother world out there with these side mount rebreathers as well, is using them as bailout rebreathers. That's something I'm looking at doing down the road, especially for some of the very deep dives and projects I have. But I need time on the unit and on the Liberty, and I need to feel completely confident in using it before I ever use it as a bailout rebreather. But it has one of those modes, so it maintains a 0.7, and I think that would be a fantastic tool down the road to have my Meg as my back mount and the Liberty as a bailout rebreather, obviously with a lot of other bailout gas as well, not just those two. But I mean, I know some people that are just using.
No, Steve Bogart. Yeah. He spoke to me about that, and it was 2 Liberties. So obviously you got to have the coin to be able to pull that off, and the jobs to be able to do it. There's no point doing it unless you've got the dives for it. But yeah, 2 Liberties would be fantastic, I'm sure.
I think it's important for any audience who's listening to know that, I mean, that's also very experimental. Rebreathers are getting better and better, and the technology is improving, and they're getting safer. And the people that are pioneering these things and using them as just 2 rebreathers or a back mount and just a side mount rebreather as a bailout rebreather, they're very experienced divers, with decades of experience, not a couple years of rebreather experience. So I think it's really important to take baby steps and know that those people have been doing it for a very long time.
No, I hear you. And I mean, that's just about the best advice you can give, isn't it? Is always take baby steps and stay within your comfort zone and within your experience, and don't be trying to jump ahead too soon. And yeah, when we mention someone like Steve Bogarts is doing this, that doesn't mean that we should be doing it immediately at all. What I do love about Steve, though, is he rationally thinks things through really, really well. If he does a particular thing, it's been thought through from the point of view of, okay, if I do have a failure of one of my rebreathers, I'm going to be on the other one. Now, what's the chance of me having 2 rebreather failures? Yes, it can happen, but it's not that likely. Equally, my bailout could fail on the way out too. So he kind of rationalizes things, but your point is extremely valid, is take your time. We've lost colleagues and friends through people rushing things, so that's not what we're saying. Thank you.
Rebreathers can give us a false sense of comfort. When everything works amazingly well. But when it doesn't work, that's when you need experience under your belt to come in and help you save your life in those situations.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I've also maintained for a long time, and I sort of learnt this way back talking to a GUE diver about open circuit versus rebreathers, is it pays to be a really good open circuit diver before you go to rebreathers. Do you agree with that? So the trimix level open circuit before you go rebreather?
I generally agree with that. I think the better you are on open circuit as a technical diver, that will set you up for success when you transition to a rebreather. But I'm seeing less and less of that now. Most of the people I see coming into classes have maybe less than 3 years of diving experience. And maybe they're at the point where they are technical divers or cave divers, but they haven't gone through trimix yet, because that's sort of where that breaking point is, where they know they want to do trimix down the road, but they see the cost of doing it open circuit. And I actually do think it is better at that point for them to stop, do the rebreather training, spend, a year, diving the rebreather, getting used to it, and then going through the trimix certification process on the rebreather.
Okay.
So
almost from the point of view that, let's say you're on a trimix dive on a rebreather and you bail out, you're now an open circuit trimix diver. So having been through that and knowing that experience well, and at least having a few dives under your belt, I think can hold you in good stead when you get bailed out, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think the more experience you have in open circuit, and especially technical diving before jumping into a rebreather, is extremely beneficial. And then, like we talked about before, then having the back mount rebreather experience before going to a side mount rebreather is also beneficial. It's setting yourself up for success down the road. Even if you think I'm only going to be diving a side mount rebreather, it just helps grow your knowledge base. And so it would be interesting for you to do it in a back mount, because you don't even dive back mount.
No, and I'm sort of cringing a little bit, but I shouldn't.
I'm not even saying that it's right for everyone. I mean, you might be able to strap on a side mount rebreather and.
Well, I'm almost certain that I'll put the Sidewinder on and it'll be just bang. And that's maybe an unrealistic expectation, but I've done a lot of side mount open circuit diving. And so I kind of do think it's going to be that way. But when you look at the Sidewinder, this is the thing about it and kind of what's led me to that particular unit. Yes, it's a side mount unit, but is it really? It's kind of a hybrid, right? You've got a couple of canisters either side of your body. You've got a counterlung on your back. So it's much closer to a back mount rebreather than it is really a true side mount rebreather.
Yeah, I know what a lot of people like about that is that you're still wearing you still have bailout on both your side mounted cylinders, and two of them, versus figuring out what to do with multiple cylinders.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for me, it's like it'll just be as normal, same harness, same cylinders either side of my body, and just putting on the additional unit. So I thought for me, it would be the easiest transition. And the other thing I was seriously thinking about was I'm so used to being trimmed out and stable in the side mount as I do it now. The closer I can be to that, the better. But having said that, I'm super excited about the Liberty. I'm super excited about hearing the T-Reb. So I'm definitely going to go and dive those units and see how they feel. And
you should. It's really fun to try different units, whether it's back mount rebreathers, side mount rebreathers. It's interesting to pull them apart, see the differences, and know that there's no perfect one out there. It's just maybe what's perfect for the environments that you're in, or what's good for you at that time.
Yeah. My fear also is we get stuck into kind of the cell phone generation of, oh my God, in 3 years' time, there's a better model and you just laid down 10,000, whatever it is, for a unit. And now here comes another one.
Hey, that's what it's like with photography, my friends.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't ask you about that. I don't know if you started in the old days of film. You're way too young for that, but it must be just an amazing transition going from rolls of film, 35 millimeter film, to where we are now with digital cameras. And
no, I did start with shooting film. I didn't transition to digital until I was in college. So, I remember going to Mexico when I was in college and taking 35, 40 rolls of film with me in my backpack to be able to shoot. And your learning curve is very different. It's amazing to be able to obviously see your photo right after you've taken it. But here's an interesting tip for anybody who's into photography and for you as well. Digital photography can also set you back a little bit as well. Just because you can take 300 or 400 photos on a dive doesn't mean that you should. I think it was very beneficial that I started shooting film because I only had 27 pictures to take. And so I still kind of keep that mentality. When I first switched over to digital, I saw my quality go down because I'd take 100 photos. but I wasn't focusing on taking a couple really good ones. I was just taking a lot.
Hoping numbers would overcome.
Yeah, because just because we can take 300 photos doesn't mean that we should take 300 photos. So focus on a couple really good ones.
Yeah, because I imagine in the days of film, you would have really had to do that, right? You would have had to stop every time you pull the trigger, if you like. It's got to be good.
Absolutely. Yeah. You spend more time setting up and tweaking your lighting, tweaking your settings, maybe bracketing your shots, making sure that, you'll have one that's in a better exposure. And so you're just going after a couple shots there versus, a couple hundred okay shots.
Superb advice. And that applies to everything, quality over quantity.
Totally. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Becky. Did we miss anything else?
I don't think so. I think we touched on everything.
We can always connect again. And later on, maybe we'll do another interview. I mean, we'll see once you've got some more experience on the Liberty, and that'd be awesome. And perhaps if you've applied it in an environment, I don't know where, but perhaps one of your cave dives or something would be really interesting to look at one of those projects and have you back again. Yeah,
that would be amazing.
Very, very cool. Well, look, I've taken a heap of your time and I'm really appreciative. I know I'm holding you up from dinner. I can hear something being cooked in the background, I hope. So thank you very, very much. I've learned a lot. I'm not much of a photographer. I'm a GoPro guy, so I'm out normally shooting a little bit of video, and I use it mainly for filming students, to be honest, for feedback. But I love trying to do little short, easy videos of what we're doing. And I think being able to expose the underwater world to other people is superb. And the storytelling and the drama and everything that comes with your images, I think, is some of the best I've seen in the world, and compliment you on that. And I'm super appreciative of you giving your time and sharing with us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm proud to have been on your episode here, and I'm looking forward to tuning in to all the rest of them. I need to go back and start listening to all of your past episodes.
Oh, and all of your friends are on there, so you should do that.
Yeah, for sure. I am. I'm planning on it.
Thanks very much, Becky.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.